Okay, so final session on IPDM management for the season, focusing on ornamental crops, but many of the messages are common to edible crops as well in today's session. So just a bit of a recap of integrated pest and disease management. It's not organic. We're looking to integrate bioprotectants in with conventional products. Just to make you aware, biopesticides have been renamed as bioprotectants, and that was the desire to sort of remove the word pesticides from the terminology to reflect that they're sort of greener credentials, if you like. We're thinking about safety of interventions and really focusing on having healthy crops, keeping them healthy, and preventing problems. And all this helps to reduce our pesticide usage, but we really need to be on the button with monitoring, and keeping on top of that with weekly monitoring is essential. So a bit of an overview of what we're going to cover today. Thinking about reviewing what's in your pesticide store, and it seems to be a good time of year for growers to do this as things quieten down a little bit, and just having a bit of a stock take, for want of a better word. Thinking about storage requirements. Are you storing everything correctly? If you've got any obsolete pesticides, thinking about how we can legally get rid of those. And on the storage of bioprotectants needs to be a bit different from conventional pesticides in some instances, and we'll dip into that later on in the presentation. Checking your pesticide stores ready for winter, really thinking about frost protection there to prevent any damage and leaks, some other hints and tips, and just planning for next year's IPDM programs, really. So that's us in a nutshell for today's session. So starting off with thinking about exactly what is in your pesticide store, knowing what's in there. Should have an inventory of what's in the store, which details the map number and the active and the quantity of the product in store. And these inventories should be at the store, but also in the farm office or the house. Just in the unlikely event of a fire breaking out, the fire brigade will want a copy of that inventory to decide how they need to fight the fire. So that's an important thing to have. So each product has a map number. There are one or two things with MAF numbers, which would be older products still authorized for use, but not many. So most of them are map numbers now. As I say, there's the odd one with a map number. And these numbers, normally 5 digits long, are key to finding out a product's final use date. And that's determines whether we can still legally use it. So that's an important thing to be aware of, and really managing stores to prevent old stock becoming an issue. So you can get instances where, say, a formulation of glyphosate for weed control, for example, has the same name and a new map number comes through. So you've got 2 products in store. As you bought more in because you're running out, and the older map number will become illegal to use at generally sooner than the new map number. So it's being aware of those dates and making sure things are used up in time, and also not storing large quantities of pesticides, really having things as you need them, and that helps the process, because occasionally we get things that are withdrawn with little notice. And depending on your size and scale, it can make it a challenge to use that product up. So keeping on top of the pesticide stocks helps us to minimize disposal costs. And the cheapest way of getting rid of things is to use it before it becomes illegal, and use it in your program so it's not waste. So when things get withdrawn, they normally have a use-up period of about a year, but there are some instances where it's less if there's some sort of safety concern. But it's, as I say, it's useful to plan to use products before they become obsolete in your program. So having a knowledge of the final use dates is important. And just making the point that pesticides can degrade even when stored under optimum conditions. So another reason for not sort of carrying big stock levels. Another thing for smaller growers is unit size, particularly for products under EAMU's extension of authorization for minor use. Those are typically sort of more agricultural type products, which may come in agricultural sized type containers, 5-10 litres, which can be challenging for smaller growers to use sufficiently quickly. So that's another consideration when you're obtaining new stock, the unit size. Anyway, we talked about final use dates and map numbers, and they can all be checked via that link that's there in the slides. And if you're finding this tricky, you can ask a basis qualified advisor, which the likes of us delivering into the Tyfu Cymru programme are, or your supplier, to help you with this task. And just wanted to give a couple of examples of a couple of products that have got final use dates coming up before the end of the year. We've got Dimilin Flow, which is an insecticide, and a glyphosate-based product for weed control, and those are the final use dates for those products. Now, if you were to not use them up by that date, they effectively become illegal. So they're illegal to store and illegal to use, and you've got to pay to get rid of them. So proactively managing store is a good thing. It helps prevent waste and cost of getting rid of these products. So thinking about storage requirements, a bit of a focus on best practice here. Really want to have a store that's got 110% capacity of your maximum pesticide storage requirements. So that really protects you if you had any sort of leaks. It keeps everything contained in that store. Now, it seems a little bit over the top, but if there was some sort of heat event and plastic containers melted, it's feasible that more than one container could leak. So hence the 110% capacity to retain that leakage. Also, the store being bunded to keep the leak in place, to give you time to get it cleared up before it leaves the store and creates environmental problems. Store should really be fire resistant and away from combustible materials, as if you do get a problem, it makes everything harder and more difficult to manage, and ideally sited to minimize danger of pollution. So wouldn't really recommend a pesticide store, even with appropriate bunding, to be sited alongside a stream, river or brook for obvious reasons of flooding, etc. They need to be frost free and well ventilated, dry inside, well lit, secure to prevent theft, and to give a good working environment for staff to have room to work in there, see which products they've got, see which products they find the products easily that they want when they go into the store. And if you've got weighing out sort of areas with scales, it's useful to have trays to contain any little spills or leaks. And again, that to be well lit, well ordered, so there's sufficient room to work and reduces the risk of things getting tipped over or spilt. We also need to have general danger warning sign, which is the exclamation mark in the yellow there, and no smoking signs on stores as well. Okay. So some of this you'll be aware of, but it's just a bit of a focus on best practice. So keeping our powders above liquids for fairly obvious reasons. If you've got a liquid leak, it doesn't then contaminate any powders that are stored beneath it. We want to have non-absorbent shelves, ideally metal, for any reasons of cleaning. If you do get any spills or leaks, they're much easier to clean. They don't become contaminated. Emergency contact numbers and accident procedures. just to help people to think in the event of a crisis. In the panic of things, they may not be thinking in the most logical way, so that's very useful to have that documented at the store. Also, eye wash, for obvious reasons, to deal with any splashes into eyes, first aid kits, first aid instructions, and having it clearly signed where that kit is kept in the store, just to help people in the event of there being a need for it. Also, very good to have a spill kit. I'd say it's essential, really, and that can vary from a spill kit that you can buy with various sort of absorbent type pads, or you can have a bucket of sand with a brush and a shovel, or cat litter or absorbent type material. That's fine as well. Also, you want to have clean running water, ideally less than 10 meters away. So if anyone had got some contamination on them that protective clothing hadn't protected them from, they can rinse that off quickly without having to travel a big distance to the nearest tap. And there's a link there to an HSE agricultural information sheet relating to storage. So that's another source of information there in a bit more detail. So occasionally obsolete pesticides do pose us a challenge. So thinking about the management and disposal of those. If it's something that you no longer use and it's still authorized and approved, there's a chance that your supplier might take it back, particularly if it's an unopened container. So that's always a route to explore. That normally occurs with people who have changes in cropping and then they're not going to use a particular active for whatever reason. As I said previously, it is illegal to store unapproved pesticides. So any stock that's awaiting disposal should be clearly signed, as here in the picture, showing that it shouldn't be used and it's awaiting disposal. And some people also put sort of red hazard tape around it just to make that really obvious. That's another thing you could do. But we really want to avoid getting into this situation because it's waste and cost to the business. So if we can use things before they become a problem and lose their approval and authorization, that's the best way forward, really, and what I'd encourage you all to do. So reviewing what you've got in stock by its map number at least annually is a very worthwhile task, because that gives you the heads up on any final use dates that are coming up and enables you to think, well, how you can use that product up before that date comes and the product becomes a problem, and enables you to use it up in your crop protection. Although it can be done annually, more frequently is useful, particularly if you're carrying a large amount of different actives. It's time well spent. So thinking about how we dispose of these obsolete pesticides, that has to be done via a licensed waste contractor, and you need to check that they are sufficiently licensed to take it. So you can check that on the public registers for details of waste carriers, and that's all available online. Also, you need to have paperwork to say that they collected it and taken it for appropriate disposal. So, and keeping copies of that paperwork, consignment notes and invoices, just to show that you've disposed of any products that you haven't used appropriately and responsibly. Another route, if you have got some products that have become obsolete, is to check with your local water company, because they periodically do offer opportunities to dispose of pesticides for free of charge, and that's to do with the protection of water. And those sort of pesticide amnesties happen fairly frequently with some of the larger water companies. So it's another thing to look out for and consider. They're basically wanting people to dispose of them responsibly. Obviously, when something becomes obsolete, it shouldn't be used, but that's what their amnesty is seeking to prevent, people using them up on the quiet, although that would be illegal.
On that question of water providers, Tyfu Cymru have what appears to be almost an ongoing situation with a specific person to remove them. What's it called? Recycler. And I applied months ago that I'd got a few things, and they sent one email, but that's still pending. Maybe I need to get in touch with them and just see what's happening.
Yeah, it'd be worth.
The free item is up to 30 kilos or 30 litres. Thereafter, you pay £3 or £4 litre a kilo. So it's not an excessive charge.
No, no.
We've had them here 2 or 3 times, and they seem to be pretty efficient.
Yeah, I'd say worth chasing them up definitely to see where that is. It varies with the scheme. I mean, I've heard of schemes that have taken up sort of 75 litres, but as I say, it varies with the scheme. And as you say, it's likely to be more cost effective than going down the commercial route and disposing of things through a sort of registered waste operator. So just a few messages on storage of conventional pesticides. Minimising the quantity stored, so we're running our stores lean and mean really, and storage in optimum conditions to minimise product deterioration. Even when they are stored in optimum conditions, things will start to deteriorate slowly. So in trials, we don't use things more than a few years old. So we have quite a program for booking things into our pesticide stores, and if they're not used within 2 or 3 years, they can't be used in trials, even if they're authorized, to prevent that becoming an issue. In commerce, they could still be used, but obviously you don't want to go to the expense of doing a trial and having a less than perfect result. Also, pesticides must be stored in their original containers. In the event of an original container being damaged or starting to leak, they can be decanted into another container, but that must be clearly marked, ideally with the label from the damaged container, to show clearly what is in there. So that needs to be managed carefully if that occurs. So storage of bioprotectants, we making a lot more use of these as the number of conventional pesticides continues to decline, and they require a bit more TLC. That's a general message. So well worth reading the labels carefully and considering the individual's product storage requirements, because they can vary quite a lot between the products. So some of them can only be stored for quite short times, up to 6 months. Others can be stored at room temperature for longer periods of time, for up to a couple of years in the case of Serenade, Amylo X, but with the caveats that higher temperatures can reduce their shelf life, and sort of room temperature is generally accepted to be around 21 degrees. And it seems with the weather patterns we get at least one, if not more, bursts of high temperatures in the summer that are well over 21 degrees, nearer 30. So that is a thing to bear in mind. Other products of these types of products need to be stored cool and dry. And then part opened or part used containers or sachets, in some cases, need to be handled differently. So moisture is a key concern with dried products in sachets, because these are live things and moisture activates them. So if moisture is able to get in, it can deteriorate things quickly. And some cases, open sachets can only be stored for a few days. So pre-stop's quite a nice example of this. It requires to be stored at lower temperatures, but if you've got open sachets and you do need to store them, they can be tightly sealed and frozen. So there are some quite useful clips that you can get, not specifically designed for pesticides, but we use them in the kitchen because we've got young children, and open bags of crisps and the like to keep air out, and they're a useful type of clip that can be used to keep air and moisture out of open sachets. Put them in a Tupperware box as well with some desiccant gels also is useful, and they're fairly easy to get out of COVID test kits. There's little sachets of desiccant gel, so you can make use of those in that situation. And just making the point where products need specifically cool storage, either refrigerated or frozen, you really need a fridge or small freezer in your pesticide store to remain legal. So that's another consideration to think about with these types of product. So it's essential that pesticide stores are frost-free. This is to avoid container splitting if they physically freeze. And despite that being a problem, freezing temperatures can damage the formulations of products, so can reduce their efficacy. So you don't want to have products in store that have been efficacy has been reduced, and then you use them and get poor control. So it's well worth managing this proactively. And this photo here is from quite a large store with a specialist sort of heating system installed with a thermostat to, not a heating system, frost protection system to prevent problems occurring. Other smaller stores have sort of a thermostatically small portable electric type heater that can be put on in periods of cooler weather, just to keep things above freezing levels. So just flagging up a few things that shouldn't end up in pesticide stores that I've come across over years. Legally, nothing other than pesticides or bioprotectants should be in there. So things like Jet 5 I've come across in pesticide stores. Now that just flagging up the fact it's an oxidizing agent. So if there was a fire, it actually produces oxygen and makes the fire more fierce and more intense. So we don't really want to be putting those in pesticide stores for that very reason. So here's a little example of someone storing these types of products separately in their own store, still within a bund. Fertilizers should be stored separately in a different location, and many of products, sort of ammonium, nitrogen, are also oxidizing agents. So thinking about where they're stored away from pesticide stores is another topic really, but just flagging that fact up. And then your personal protective equipment for applying pesticides should be stored in a locker, and that locker shouldn't be within the store. So, because no matter how clean you keep the store, there's always a sort of slight aroma of pesticide in there, and if you're keeping your PPE in there, that could pick it up and potentially be an exposure route for operators. So some tips for using bioprotectants in pest control programs. Most of them are contact acting. They can be slower acting and in some cases less effective than pesticides. And really you need more knowledge and need to use these products carefully to achieve the desired level of control. So we need to be getting the product in the right place at the right time, thinking about getting it on when pest numbers are at the appropriate level. So if pest numbers are built up to high levels, I wouldn't recommend starting with a bioprotectant as your first line of defense. Also thinking about the time of day and the environmental conditions. So temperature and humidity are very important for some of the products for pest control in particular. A lot of them are fungal type products that require a certain temperature level and humidity to grow and infect the pests. And having a knowledge of that is very useful and important to get good results with these types of products. And also, if you know what's required, you can start to think, well, how can I manipulate the environment a little bit to give these things the best chance of working? So applying them late in the day, putting screens over to keep out UV and keep some humidity there, perhaps even closing your vents to keep the required temperature and humidity overnight to give these products the best chance of working. It's a balancing act because you're weighing that up between increasing disease pressure for the crop, but depending on the crop and the situation and the pest, you're in the best position to make those types of decisions. So when applying bioprotectants for pest control, we want to apply them in the best way and in an appropriate water volume, and we'll come back to water volumes in a slide or two, and at the right application frequency. So some of these products do need more than one application. They rely on repeat applications to keep knocking the pest down, and they're best used in an integrated pest and disease management program. So some other tips for using bioprotectants in disease control programs. So we really want to be starting very early in the crop's life cycle before diseases become a problem. So working on the theory of starting clean and staying clean. And it's interesting, there's this sort of more interest in using these types of products, even in broadacre cereal crops these days. So the momentum's definitely there. And even in other sectors, they've got less fungicides and they've lost some quite important actives. So everyone's on the same journey. So and they're reporting some positive results in relation to yield on sort of broadacre cereal crops. So as long as you use the products properly and appropriately, they can work and give you good results. So weekly monitoring is essential just to keep tabs on where you are. Prevention is always better than cure with these types of products. So we've got a few different options. So a fairly new product called PhytoSave came to market a couple of years ago now through EAMU for use in ornamentals, and it's got other uses in fruit, I believe, Nick. So that's might be one of interest to yourself. And it's best used with 2 or 3 successive applications to stimulate the plant host defense mechanisms. And so we use it a little bit differently to other bioprotectants that we would typically use alternated with conventional fungicides. So again, important to read the labels carefully and pick up these sort of tips that give you the best results from the products. Some products also have additional sort of technical information that's available from suppliers, so it's worth seeking that out and reading it and digesting it, because they'll give you more information to get best results. But as a general statement with bioprotectants, it's useful to block them together. So thinking of Serenade, for example, you've got 6 applications for most crops. So putting a Serenade on, then a fungicide, then a Serenade, then a fungicide, and so on till you've used your 6 applications, and then moving on to your next bioprotectant, again alternating with fungicides, and that helps avoid potential compatibility issues between the microbial bioprotectants. We don't want to be putting something on that's effectively fighting with our next control we're putting on and not protecting the crop and wasting its energy in that way. So water volumes, bit of a grey area in some places. Many product labels say good coverage, but that doesn't really tell us much. Some give more guidance in terms of water volumes and actually put some figures down. And some labels don't give us any guidance on water volumes. So in some cases, left for you to decide on an appropriate water volume. But the main thing to have in your mind, if you put the lower the water volume, generally the more product and active is retained on the crop. So when higher water volumes are used, you get spray droplets coalescing under the influence of gravity, so effectively running together, and then they gain energy with weight, and then they run off the crop and contaminate the floor and run to waste. So they're not always, it's not good to put high volumes on for most of our targets. So they don't give us better crop coverage. So there's some research done on this in the AHDB Amber research project by Silso Spray Applications Unit, testing various different water volumes between 98 and 1,000 litres on pot chrysanthemums. And they used a tracer dye to simulate a bioprotectant and measured the amount retained on the plants. So and this was done applying at a constant dose. So thinking of a example, although it's a chemical one, it's quite a good example, is Amistar. In ornamentals, we'd use it at perhaps 1 litre a hectare, depending on the situation. There are some restrictions on the EAMU. So if you're putting that on in 1,000 litres a hectare of water, 1 litre, it's 1 mil per litre. But thinking how the product was designed to be used in broad acre crops at lower water volumes, typically as low as sort of 200, some arable folks are even applying pesticides at 100 litres a hectare. You're putting it on, if you're putting it on at 1,000 litres a hectare, you're putting it on in a lot more dilute concentration, and it's perhaps intended, and this can increase the risk of fungicide resistance and other problems. So as you increase your water volume, your concentration can decrease. So that's the sort of key message there. And lower water volumes give us better deposition on the crop, reduce waste. They can also reduce labour time for application. People don't tend to think about costs of application in horticultural crops because they're always near to a accessible, or generally always near to accessible source of water. But putting a lot of water on, more time for fill-ups, it all adds to cost and time to do the job. Whereas in field scale crops, where the water is to be transported, it focuses the mind a little more. Minimum water volume and maximum concentration on the label must also be adhered to, because that's a legal requirement. So you need to be aware some labels do actually specify in a minimum of 500 litres per hectare, and if that's the case, you can't go any lower than 500 litres a hectare. So it's quite a bit to consider with water volumes. But other products to think about, so there's ability for saving. So when applying something at a constant concentration, so thinking about sort of one of physical products such as Majestic. So on, again, thinking back to a trial on pot chrysanthemums at the bud stage, maximum retention was at 1,000 litres per hectare. But on smaller plants, lower water volumes can be used to avoid runoff. And if you put higher water volumes on small plants, concentrations, it's constant concentration, it's wasteful and more expensive. So what I'm getting at is where we're using a product with a rate per litre, if you put it on at 500 litres a hectare instead of 1,000 litres a hectare, and it's giving you equal or better control, you're cutting your costs by 50%. But that can only be done where products are put on at a rate per litre rather than a rate per hectare. So just wanted to touch on any successes, challenges and failures you've had with bioprotectants this season. It'd be useful just to discuss those, I think, and see if we can add a bit of insight where things have not perhaps worked as well as you'd like, or you've had a great success you'd like to share. I think it'd be interesting to do that quickly. So should we start with you, Nick? Have you got?
Yeah, so we've used bioprotectants on the strawberries and the cherries, and with the strawberries, for instance, we didn't see any mildew for the whole season.
Great.
But botrytis, yes, that did raise its ugly head from time to time. But we also do quite a lot of other husbandry on the strawberries now. We take a lot of dead leaves, finished trusses, overripe fruit, all that comes off. So and I haven't used a conventional fungicide in strawberries now for a number of years. So I can't tell what is couldn't tell you what is a success or a failure. It's manageable. It's manageable. That's all I would say. And we used a combination of we had three separate things in the program, and I sprayed every 8 days or 10 days or so, and we used Serenade and AQ10, and we used Protector, and we used Amino X. So we just rotated. In the other place where we did use them was in the cherries, and I used quite a bit of Serenade and Amino X there, and both of those are supposed to have, I think, some activity against bacterial canker, which we used in the autumn or after post-fruiting, but bacterial canker is very difficult to control, and without access to copper, fungicides, that's we could do with a bit more. We need more information about how to deal with that, I think.
Yeah. Bacteria is a real problem to control. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to control. But prevention is the key. And the products you mentioned, Serenade and Amylo X, have got activity against bacterial infections. So they definitely help and worth doing. And that's the beauty of some of the bioprotectants. They're quite broad spectrum. So those types of products will have activity against sort of botrytis, bacterial infections, some activity against powdery mildew, leaf spots. So you're covering quite a nice range of problems that can occur. And it sounds like you've managed your botrytis through a range of cultural sort of techniques and using the bioprotectants. I mean, when things get away from us in ornamentals, we tend to close the spray program interval down like you've been doing, and people might go as low as every 7 days, but that's whereas when pressure's lower, they might be every 14 days, but that's very much dependent on the time of year and the weather. So
yeah, sure. And I think with the bioprotectants, you don't always have a choice if you can't match the correct environmental conditions for applying that combination. You may have to wait. If it's blazing hot and very very low humidity, it's not great for using those sorts of products. You have to make sure that you're using them fairly late in the day. And of course, we're all helped. I mean, virtually all the soft fruit and cherries, it's all undercover, isn't it? That's helpful. And of course, some of those products you're supposed to use in a sealed space, aren't you?
Yes.
So you have to adhere to that.
Yes, there are restrictions on some products with permanent protection with full enclosure, and that level of detail will be detailed on the authorization, either on the label or the EMU. So that's all has to be taken into account. So thanks, Nick. Michael, anything you'd like to share, or successes or challenges?
We've used some bioprotectants this time, but my grey cells don't
think you've frozen. So we'll just give it a second. But I think Michael was saying he couldn't remember exactly what they'd used, but we can perhaps revisit that if the connection picks up in a minute or two. So moving on, just sort of thinking about planning your IPDM program for next season. As a good rule of thumb, it's useful to commence introductions of biocontrols under protection in about April. That's when temperatures are normally high enough, but like anything in growing, it's taking account of the weather and the season. And if it's a very cold spring, it might be worth pushing it back a couple of weeks. If it's a very early warm spring, it might be worth pulling it forward a little bit. So acting accordingly, really. And the date of starting applying bioprotectants for disease really depends on your crop and what the pressures are within that crop. So it might start at the start of a year, it might start a bit later for a deciduous crop such as roses that are coming into leaf later in the year, so maybe March, April. There's a new product to think about including in bioprotectant programs. That's a product called Romeo, which is authorized for use under EAMU. We've got 8 applications to play with in ornamental plant production, so useful to have more products in the armory, and that trend should continue as crop protection continues to go down this road. So this product works by stimulating the plant's host defense mechanisms, so helping to keep the plant healthy and keep disease out of a plant, and helps with control of a range of pathogens, notably botrytis, powdery and downy mildews. So a useful product that we're glad to have. Just thinking a little bit about resistance management. As we've got less conventional chemistry, we run the risk of getting into resistance problems if we overuse that chemistry, and bioprotectants are a great tool to reduce the risk of that, because most of them are low risk in terms of resistance. Now, every product has a FRAC code, and for example, for products for disease control, FRAC code, Fungicide Resistance Action Committee, is what FRAC stands for. And you can Google FRAC codes and find out which products, which codes are attributed to which products to plan your programs, or something we can assist yourselves with. But just flagging up sort of some widely used fungicides are related. So Amistar and Signum, they've both got an 11 in their FRAC code, and as a result, they shouldn't be used closely together in the same programs because they're very similar. And we really need to focus on preserving our remaining controls through less reliance on conventional sort of chemistry to keep those sort of products when we really need them, for when things get challenging and disease pressure is higher. So a little bit just to flag up on spray programs. There's a spray program using bioprotectants for disease control that's available on the Knowledge Hub. It's a useful resource. It's for ornamental crops, but programs can be created for different crops if there's a need to do so. Also, we can help provide advice on bioprotectants for pest control, because that's the key focus on disease control there. And culture controls are key when using bioprotectants. Regular spray applications of bioprotectants, backing up those culture controls, typically alternated with fungicides. So that's thank you for today, and thank you for listening. Hope that's been useful. And as I say, more information on the Knowledge Hub, and whether there's any questions anyone would like to raise.
Nick, would you have any questions for David?
Yeah, I wonder if David could comment on the demise of the HDC. That was a very useful and accessible source of information. how does he see that being replaced, or is he satisfied that individual growers can source an equivalent?
So there's actually been DEFRA finally made an announcement on sort of what will happen. So I believe, I haven't seen the announcement, I only heard about it today through a colleague, but I believe there's going to be provision of a minor use sort of network which will process and get EAMUs for the industry, which have been essential given this the decline in availability of crop protection products and products that we've lost. So that will continue, but that's only part of their work. Obviously, all the research that they did has sort of ceased largely in the ornamentals world, and it will leave a gap, and that's something that will need to be addressed going forwards, really, because without research, it's difficult to go forward in some ways. So yeah, it certainly will leave a hole, and it's difficult to say how that will be filled at this stage, really. I mean, some of the larger growers might commission work to be done directly for themselves, but that doesn't benefit everyone. So
yeah, so it's quite worrying, isn't it? We've rather taken that the sort of information that you've given us today. A lot of that, I suppose, would have been generated and disseminated through HDC in the past, wouldn't it?
Yes, certainly, yeah.
I think as individual growers should be aware that you can't take that information for granted anymore.
Well, thank you very much, Nick, and thank you, David, for a really informative session. This programme is supported by one-to-one support, so if anyone does want any further information, please do contact us, and we can arrange for support in different ways, either through email or a one-to-one visit with David and our other agronomists. Thank you very much for attending today, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.